Good evening, everyone.
Good
Good,
evening, sir.
good
Good
evening.
evening, sir.
Good evening. Okay. So I welcome all of you to this rapid revision session for ATX. What we are going to do in the next couple of days is we'll be doing a thorough revision of all the important aspects in your ATX exam. Now, one part of the discussion will be focused on a quick revision of concepts. And as you know, in ATX, there's very little to explain, and specifically at this stage of the discussion, when your paper is exactly a week away. So, our focus will be on revising concepts in the sense we'll revisit the provisions. Key, for example, if we are talking about residential status, then how is the residential status determined and what kind of questions are possible? Apart from that, what I'll also try to do is I will try to include, say, for example, today we are doing overseas taxes or overseas aspect of taxes. I will specifically try to include any questions from the exam kit which specifically deal with that part of the syllabus. And apart from that, if it is possible, I will find time to discuss some more exam kit questions with you. People who are in the regular batch, I'll ensure that the questions that I do now are different from the questions that we have already covered. And since your exam is on the next Wednesday, right, which is a week from now, I'll try to wind up all the revision before Saturday, maximum by Sunday. That is the intention. Let's see how well we are able to accomplish that. The first discussion that I want to start off with is a discussion on overseas aspect of tax. Now, the overseas aspect of tax finds mention in almost all aspects of your syllabus. So you could be talking about corporate tax, and there you have overseas aspect. You could be talking about CGT, and then there are overseas aspects there. You could be talking about income tax, inheritance tax, VAT. Overseas aspects are literally everywhere. So it's important that you pay specific attention to the overseas aspect. आपके paper में I can kind of assure you, I think I have given you the list of most asked topics. I think 21 topics का मैंने आपको list दिया था. So उसमें overseas taxation is one of the most critical ones. उस पे आप you can expect anywhere 6 to 8 marks in your exam. ठीक है. आपको इधर ओवरसीज एस्पेक्ट ऑफ कंपनीज आएगा. कंपनीज में भी व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट ओवरसीज एस्पेक्ट्स, द फोकस इज फर्स्ट. One question that is very commonly asked is making an election to exempt the profits of an overseas establishment. तो उस पे काफी सारे questions है जो possible है in the paper. So let's begin our preparation from there. ठीक है. Okay. So let's understand how do we determine the residential status of a company. Just a small request, keep your mic switched off unless you are specifically talking to me. ठीक है. अगर आप मुझसे बात कर रहे हो तो माइक ऑन रखो, otherwise your mic should remain switched off. How do we define the residential status of a company? A company is resident in the UK if it is incorporated in the UK or incorporated elsewhere and has a place of central management and control in the UK. Place of central management and control, what does that mean? The place where all the critical decisions about the company are taken. Basically, the place where your board meetings are conducted, where your directors reside, that could help you in deciding the residential status of a company. Now, it's not, you don't have one single factor helping you to decide the residential status, but you will have to understand it using facts of the case. Now, if a company is resident in the UK, then all its UK profits are taxable. Its global profits are also taxable in the UK, which means if you have a branch in Paris and you have earned some income there, then even that income becomes taxable in the United Kingdom. A questions which will involve determination of the residential status might not be asked because that's more like a skill level concept. Okay, but to understand this in a better manner, let's understand what happens when an entity trades overseas. Okay, so if I am a company which is resident in the UK and I am trading with say someone, I am exporting goods to the United States of America. When I am exporting goods to the United States, I am receiving income in the UK. I am trading with another country, and income that is received will be taxed in the United Kingdom. I could also have a situation where I am trading within the overseas country, which means I have a permanent establishment in another country, which could be like a branch, like it could be like a showroom, it could be like any of these different setups. But what happens when you are talking about a permanent establishment? A permanent establishment within an overseas country basically includes, it could be a branch, it could be a place of management, it could be a showroom, it could be a factory, it could be a workshop, it could be a mine from where extraction of minerals is happening. It could be any of these things. Okay. And the moment you have a permanent establishment in another country, say I am in India and I have a, or rather I am in UK and I have a permanent establishment in Italy, or I have a showroom in Italy. So the government of Italy will say that whatever profits you have earned here, see, you are located in our country. So whatever profits you earned here, we have the right to levy tax on that. In the in the country of Italy, you would have paid, say, 15% tax. And when the same income is, see, you have a branch there, you earned income, that income ultimately belongs to the head office or the primary entity. So the income that you earned from your Italian branch gets taxed there at the rate of 15%, and then it is brought to the United Kingdom where it is taxed again. Now, in order to prevent this double taxation, we have something that is known as the double tax relief. Now, how does the double tax relief actually work? We don't have treaty relief in our syllabus. We only have the unilateral relief. What is unilateral relief? In this case, there is no double taxation avoidance agreement there is no double tax treaty with another country, and you have to calculate the double taxation relief. How is it calculated? It is always the lower of overseas tax suffered and UK corporate tax attributable to the overseas income. So say for example, I'm not a small company. I don't have small profits. I'm in the 25% slab and I earn a profit of 1 lakh pounds in Italy. So there I will pay tax. Say for example, the tax rate in Italy on this 1 lakh is 15%. Now, the government of United Kingdom, HMRC, is also going to say that, we also have a right to levy tax on this. So in the UK, the tax liability at the rate of 25% is how much? 25,000. Now, if you say this to the company ki listen, वहां पे 15,000 pay किया, in UK you pay another 25,000, total tax 40,000, they will say करना ही नहीं है overseas business. So, in order to prevent double taxation, you get a relief, which is lower of overseas tax suffered 15,000 or UK corporate tax attributable to overseas income, which in this case is 25. तो आपको relief कितने का मिलेगा? Your relief will be 15,000 and you will have to pay an additional amount of 10,000 in the United Kingdom. Okay. Now, when you are trading overseas, you could do it in two ways. Okay. One is you could establish a subsidiary there. A subsidiary is a separate legal entity. It is a separate company altogether. Or you could or you could have a permanent establishment like a branch or a showroom or an office overseas. Now, understand what happens here. If you have an overseas subsidiary is a separate entity. If the subsidiary incurs a loss, that loss of an overseas subsidiary cannot be adjusted against profits made by the holding company. Overseas subsidiary, even if it is the part of a 75% loss relief group, that loss cannot be adjusted against the profits in the head office or profits in the holding company. So guys, please make sure that your mics are on mute. It disturbs my flow. Please, this is the only request I am making. So, where was I? We were talking about subsidiary. So, if a subsidiary makes a loss, even though it is a part of 75% loss relief group, the loss incurred in an overseas country cannot be adjusted against the holding company's profit and vice versa. So, setting up a subsidiary also gives you an advantage. What kind of advantage? That when you make profits in the other country, when the subsidiary makes profits in the other country, those are not taxed by the holding company. But the loss made by the subsidiary also cannot be adjusted against the holding company's profit. So in that case, setting up a branch makes more sense. You could set up a branch office in another country, and whatever, if at all the branch incurs a loss, the loss will be adjusted against the profits of the head office, because branch is an extension of yourself. A subsidiary is an independent entity altogether. Now, UK tax provisions give you the permission to elect to exempt the profits of an overseas establishment. Suppose I have one branch in Italy, one branch in South Africa, one branch in Australia. Okay. Now I can make an election, which by the way is an irrevocable election, which means once made, it cannot be reversed again. So if I make an election ki out of all these, there are 10 branches I have, and I have decided to make an election to exempt profits of the overseas establishment. So whatever profits are made in Australia, whatever profits are made in Italy, whatever profits are made in South Africa, they will not be charged in UK, although all of these are my branches. But the flip side is that even if you incur a loss in the other country, that loss cannot be adjusted now. So you cannot have it both ways. The moment you make an election to exempt profits, you cannot adjust losses also. You cannot get a relief for capital allowances also. And again, nothing, no benefit arising in case of CGT as well. And this election can be made at any time, but once made, it is effective for the entire lifetime of the company. It is an irrevocable decision. Second thing, if it is applied to one branch, it has to be compulsorily applied to all the branches. You cannot be selective about here. I will apply this special provision of exemption to two branches which are making a profit and not apply it to the other branches which are making a loss. So this choice is not available to you. If you make an election, it applies to everyone or it doesn't apply to anyone. So a lot of questions in your ATX paper will often be on whether you want to set up a branch or whether you want to set up a subsidiary. See, there is one more advantage of setting up a subsidiary. If you set up a subsidiary in a foreign country, that subsidiary earns a profit, and the profits of that subsidiary can be transferred to the holding company by way of a dividend, because you know that dividend is exempt in the hands of companies. Dividend is a taxable income in the hands of individuals, but dividend is an exempt income in the hands of companies. So even if the subsidiary makes a profit and it transfers it to the holding company by way of a dividend, that is still okay. And you know, you will not be taxed on it, but you will have to pay attention to the fact that if the subsidiary is making a loss, then that loss cannot be adjusted by the holding company. The branch versus subsidiary wala questions are a favorite in your ATX exam. I have discussed the benefits of setting up a branch, benefits of setting up a subsidiary. Make sure that you go through all of that. We have discussed one basic part of the double taxation relief, which says that DTR is the lower of overseas tax suffered and UK corporate tax attributable to overseas income. And if there is any excess overseas tax on branch profits, then it can be carried back for 3 years against UK corporate tax on profits from the same branch, or carried forward indefinitely against the UK corporate tax on profits from the same branch. What is this provision? Say, for example, the tax suffered overseas, is 18,000 and you got DTR of 10,000. Okay, so unadjusted overseas tax of an overseas branch. कितना है unadjusted overseas tax of the overseas branch? 8,000. Now, the head office, think from HO's perspective. ठीक है? Think from head office's perspective. In the future, HO believes that profits from the same overseas branch will invite a tax of 9,000. This 8,000 unrelieved tax can be adjusted against this future liability of 9,000, and pay only 1,000. Okay, you don't have to pay 9,000. You can adjust that 8,000 here, and all you will have to pay is a balance amount of 1,000. Okay, this is how unrelieved overseas taxes can be carried forward in the future. But if it is an unrelieved tax on rent or interest, then there is no relief. Okay, a couple of simple questions on calculation of UK tax liability. River PLC has received a rent of 1,19,000 in the year ended 31st of March from an overseas property. A withholding tax rate of 15% has been applied to the rent received by River PLC. So it has received a rent of 1,19,000. Received matlab that is after taxes. ठीक है ये received amount है. This is after taxes. What is the rate of withholding tax? 15%, which means if income is 100, 15 is withheld and 85 is paid to you. How much did you receive? You received 1,19,000. So आपका gross income कितना हो जाएगा? 1,40,000. 21,000 is tax suffered overseas. And on 1,40,000, what is the UK corp tax? UK corp tax is 1,40,000 into 25%, which is 35,000. Double taxation relief will be the lower of the two, which is 21,000. Now, if this is an interesting situation where there are you have operations in different parts of the world. The Paris branch has a profit of 54,000 after deduction of withholding tax of 40%. The Rome branch has suffered a loss of 50,200. There is rental income and then there is dividend income from a Berlin company. Compute London Limited's UK corp tax payable for the year ended 31st of March 25, assuming that the overseas branch exemption election has not been made. See, if the election has not been made, then you will be able to adjust the loss of the Rome branch against profits of the head office. ठीक है. So UK का head office का profit, UK का profit is 38,000. Paris branch का profit after deducting withholding tax is 54,000. Gross up करके हो जाएगा 90,000. 54,000 upon 60%. And rental income received in Berlin is whatever location is 218,457. There is a withholding tax of 13%. So you gross that up. Now, what is the amount of overseas loss? Overseas loss is 50,200. ठीक है. The overseas loss, by the way, should be there is a specific sequence for adjusting the overseas loss. How should it be adjusted? First against UK incomes and then against the source suffering the lowest rate of overseas tax. So, while 50,200 is your loss, adjust it against UK profit first and then against that source which has suffered the lowest rate of tax. The dividend. Yeah, एक second. एक second. I have to literally shut connections with the entire world, otherwise people will keep on calling. Okay, cool. So this is rental income after deduction of withholding tax of 13%. Tax suffered in this location is 13. Tax suffered in Berlin is 27. Lower tax was suffered in this location. So you should adjust your overseas loss first against UK income, then against the then against this particular source. So 50,200 में से 38 यहाँ पे adjust करो, 12,200 यहाँ पे adjust करो. Your taxable total profit will be this, and then calculate the DTR. How is DTR? DTR is lower of overseas tax suffered. On this 90,000, what is the overseas tax suffered? 90,000 into 40%, that is 36,000. And what is tax on this income in the United Kingdom? Iska 25%, that is 22,500. The lower of the two will be considered as double taxation relief. Now, if you decide to make the election to exempt the profits of the overseas branch, then what happens? See, the Paris branch income will not be taxed in UK, but at the same time, the loss from the Rome branch will also not be allowed to be adjusted. So, UK profits 38,000, rental income 251,100. नो लॉस एडजस्टमेंट पॉसिबल. फिर उस पे फुल आपको कैलकुलेट करना पड़ेगा द टोटल इनकम, एंड यू विल हैव टू कैलकुलेट डबल टैक्सेशन रिलीफ विच विल बी हायर ऑफ overseas tax suffered or UK tax attributable to overseas income. So For calculating DTR, just keep this in mind, not just in corporate tax, but anywhere else also. How do you calculate DTR? DTR is always lower of tax suffered overseas and UK tax on that particular source of income. Cool. Another question which is not so frequent in the ATX exam, but is often, but which can be asked is a control foreign corporation. Now, what is a control foreign corporation? If they ask you, this particular system is working in order to artificially divert the profits outside the United Kingdom. Artificially divert the profits outside the United Kingdom so that they are taxed elsewhere, and maybe that country has a lower rate of tax, which is why you are diverting the profits outside the UK. HMRC is smarter than you, which is why they have put in place a lot of measures for anti-avoidance. One of those measures is the control foreign corporation bit. In this case, a CFC is defined as a non-UK resident company. It should not be resident in the UK. Second point, it is controlled by UK resident companies and or individuals, and that has artificially diverted the profits away from the UK. Now, a question can never ask you to decide whether profits have been artificially diverted away from the UK or not. ये आपको वो कभी पूछ नहीं सकता. So they will always mention in the question that the profits have been artificially diverted away from the United Kingdom. Now, this CFC charge, although it is levied in certain cases, there are quite a few relaxations given, out of which there are 5 conditions. If you fulfill any one of these, then you are exempted from the application of the CFC charge. The first one is exempt period. Now, what is covered under this exempt period clause? We'll come to that in a minute. Let's look at the other 4 clauses first. Excluded territory. HMRC has made a list of territories. If the company is in one of these territories, then we will not have a CFC charge applicable. Or if your company has low profits, how do you define low profits? The TTP is 5 lakh or less, and of which no more than 50,000 comprises non-trading profits. Okay, so the total profit has to be less than 5 lakhs and non-trading profits have to be less than 50,000. If both of these conditions are fulfilled, only then you will say that the company is earning low profits. What is low profit margin? The CFC's accounting profits are no more than 10% of the relevant operating expenditure. Profits are not more than 10% of operating expenditure. One reason why sometimes people get confused is they look at the word margin and they immediately correlate that with sale. But that is something which is not the intention of the provision. The provision says that if your accounting profits are 10% or less of the relevant operating expenditure, then that comes under the category of low profit margin. Okay, tax exemption is the 5th clause, which says that tax paid in the overseas country is at least 75% of the UK corporation tax, which would be due if CFC were a UK resident company. What does that mean? Suppose overseas income is 1 lakh. Tax in the UK is 25,000. Overseas tax suffered is 20,000. You get the tax paid in the overseas country is at least 75% of UK corporation tax. What does that mean? 25,000 ka 75% calculate karo, which is 18,750. Now, if the tax suffered overseas is 18,750 or more, then you will fit under this particular exemption clause of tax exemption. And again, the CFC profits will not be taxed in the UK. So 4 conditions: excluded territory, low profits, low profit margin and tax exemption. इसके बाद आता है exempt period वाला condition. The first 12 months of the overseas company coming under the control of UK residents will be exempt from a CFC charge provided it continues to be a CFC in the following accounting period. ठीक है. First, so there are certain investors in the UK, they acquire control of an overseas company. Okay. So the first 12 months after them acquiring control, if the company continues to be a CFC in the following accounting period and it is not subject to a CFC charge in that period, matlab in the first year होने के बाद second year में, in the second year the company is a CFC, that is conditions 1, 2, 3 should be fulfilled, and the taxes overseas, the CFC charge is not applicable by virtue of any of these 4 clauses, then the first 12 months will be considered as exempt period, and even then you will not have to bear any CFC charge. The most commonly tested condition in the paper is low profits, low profit margin, and tax exemption. One and two is not really tested as much in the exam. Mute. Mute, please. Small request. Please, guys, I'm repeating again. आपके बैकग्राउंड में से आवाज आएगा ना तो मेरा लिंक टूट जाएगा. प्लीज डोंट अनम्यूट योर सेल्फ अनलेस यू आर आस्किंग मी अ क्वेश्चन. इट्स अ स्मॉल रिक्वेस्ट. Samir, these days, do you know, right, what goes on in my mind? Samir?
सर.
है ना? वेरी गुड. यू हैव बिकम वेरी स्मार्ट. एंड ये हर्ष अपना वाला हर्ष है? विच हर्ष आर यू?
यस सर.
अच्छा अच्छा. मतलब ये वैसे पूरा अपना ही बैच बैठा है जो नॉर्मल क्लासेस में नहीं आता है बट आज आ गया. क्यों? नहीं, बट योर केस
सर
आई नो यू आर सेल्फ स्टडिंग सो आई हैव नो क्वाल्म्स इन दैट प्रोसेस. रेगुलर क्लास में नहीं है उतने लोग आज आए हैं. बाहर का कौन है, मतलब हु वाजंट एनरोल्ड विथ मी? मीत. बट मीत तो अपना ही बच्चा है. और मीत आजकल कैमरा बंद करके बैठता है, एसबीएल में तो ऑन करता था, क्या हो गया?
हाँ सर कुछ डिटेल में सर. आप
क्या
बोलते हो
थक
तो.
गया?
नहीं नहीं, आप बोलते तभी फिर.
अच्छा, मैं बोलता हूँ तभी करता है तो कर ले अभी. थोड़ा मुझे भी कोई ह्यूमन बीइंग दिख जाएगा. कैसी चल रही है पढ़ाई?
अच्छा सर है, अभी तो रिवीजन ही चालू है और सर जो डाउट्स आते हैं वो सॉल्व करता हूँ.
ओके.
चल रहा है.
सबको बता दो कि तू माइनर है और 18 साल के पहले एसीसीए बनने वाला है
यार
ना?
हो गया वो 20 साल का हूँ यार.
अरे मेरे को आधार कार्ड देखना पड़ेगा और वो भी आजकल झूठा बनता है, मैंने सुना है.
नहीं नहीं, मेरा सही है, 20 साल का हो गया.
ओके, इफ यू से सो आई विल बिलीव यू. चलो. And if by some reason you don't fit in one of the five clauses, ठीक है, then a CFC charge may arise. CFC charge only applies to chargeable profits, that is income of the CFC, not on chargeable gains, and that has been artificially diverted from the UK, calculated using the UK tax rules. Instead of theorizing it, let's quickly look at an example to understand how is the CFC charge calculated. Zetec, a UK company with taxable profits of 20,000 for the year to 31st of March 2025, holds 90% of an overseas subsidiary resident in Maxia. The subsidiary falls within the definition of a CFC. मतलब आपको प्रूव नहीं करना है कि CFC है कि नहीं, दे दिया है. Overseas subsidiary has 6 lakh pounds of profit for the period, 75% of which are caught by the CFC legislation. So 6 lakhs में से 75%, that is only 4,50,000 is caught by the CFC legislation. What is the CFC charge? CFC charge only applies to a UK corporate shareholder, by the way. If the UK company owns at least 25% interest in the CFC, no CFC charge on individual shareholders. तो और भी नैरो कर दिया उसका applicability. And CFC charges UK company's share of CFC profits into main rate of corp tax less creditable tax DTR that would be available if the CFC were a UK resident. UK company's share of CFC profit, which is how much? 4,50,000 into main rate of corp tax. मेन रेट ऑफ कॉर्प टैक्स मतलब 25%. ठीक है. बट you hold 90% shares in the subsidiary company, so पूरा 4,50,000 पे नहीं आएगा. 4,50,000 into 90%, उस पे अगेन 25% because that is the rate of corp, main rate of corp tax in the UK. उसमें से what are you supposed to subtract? DTR that would be available if the CFC were UK resident. How do you calculate double taxation relief? Lower of tax suffered overseas or tax suffered that will be suffered in the United Kingdom. अब tax suffered overseas कितना है? First of all 6 lakh. उसमें का only 75% profit is caught by the CFC legislation. उसको into your share is 90%. Tax suffered overseas is 5%. तो कितना रिलीफ मिला आपको? 20,250 का डबल टैक्सेशन रिलीफ. एंड द CFC चार्ज दैट यू हैव टू पे इज 81,000. सीएफसी चार्ज कैलकुलेट करने के क्वेश्चंस कम हैं, बट सीएफसी चार्ज एप्लीकेबल है कि नहीं उसके क्वेश्चंस हैव बीन टेस्टेड मोर फ्रीक्वेंटली इन द पेपर। ठीक है। CFCs are regarded as having no chargeable profits if any of the following conditions are satisfied. The CFC does not hold any assets or bear any risk under any arrangements or tax planning schemes intended to reduce UK tax. What does this mean? This means that the CFC has not been created with an intention to reduce the burden of tax in the UK. It does not hold any assets that are managed in the UK, and the company would continue to function even if the UK management stopped controlling the company. अगर ये कंडीशन भी फुलफिल होता है तो भी देर इज नो CFC चार्ज। अब अगर आप ICAI का एग्जाम लिख रहे होते तो इस पे देर वॉज अ पॉसिबिलिटी ऑफ मेनी मेनी क्वेश्चंस, बट आपका ATX का एग्जाम है तो आई डोंट फोरसी these three conditions getting tested anywhere in the paper। ठीक है। ओके। हमने कितना टाइम लिया था इन रेगुलर बैच, समीर?
So 4 घंटा।
अभी कितने में हुआ? आधे घंटे में, राइट? बिकॉज एक्चुअली आई एम नॉट सॉल्विंग ऑल द क्वेश्चंस, आई एम ओनली गोइंग थ्रू द प्रोविजंस। ओके, नाउ लेट्स टॉक अबाउट इंडिविजुअल्स नाउ। हाउ डू वी डिफाइन रेसिडेंशियल स्टेटस ऑफ एन इंडिविजुअल? You have to compulsorily follow the three steps here. The first step is the automatic non-residence test. If you get stuck in any of these non-residence test, तो आप नॉन रेसिडेंट बन जाते हो। इसमें से किसी में अटक गए तो नॉन रेसिडेंट। इफ यू क्लियर ऑल थ्री, आप किसी में भी नहीं अटके, तो देन यू अप्लाई द ऑटोमेटिक रेसिडेंस टेस्ट। उसके बाद आफ्टर अप्लाइंग द ऑटोमेटिक रेसिडेंस टेस्ट उसमें भी आप नहीं फंसे, तो देन यू विल हैव टू गो फॉर द सफिशिएंट टाइस टेस्ट। ठीक है। अब when it comes to determination of the residential status, you should always apply the UK automatic non-residence test first. What is the automatic non-residence test? Automatic non-residence test में there are three tests that you can check। ठीक है। एक 16 डेज का है, एक 46 डेज का है, एक 91 डेज का है। हाउ आई कीप दैट इन माइंड इज 15 इंटू 3 इंटू 6, उसमें एक एक दिन ऐड करो तो आपको 16, 46 और 91 डेज मिलता है। इनमें से एक भी कंडीशन गलती से भी फुलफिल हो गया तो यू आर अ नॉन रेसिडेंट। एक भी कंडीशन फुलफिल नहीं हुआ तो देन यू आर अ रेसिडेंट इन द, देन ऑफ कोर्स यू विल पास ऑन टू द ऑटोमेटिक UK रेसिडेंसी टेस्ट। ठीक है। अब व्हाट आर द ऑटोमेटिक नॉन UK रेसिडेंसी टेस्ट? तीन टेस्ट है अपने पास। An individual is automatically not a resident in the UK if he was in the UK, ठीक है, if he was in the United Kingdom for less than 16 days and has been UK resident for one or more of the previous 3 tax years। current year में you were in the UK for 16 days and a resident in the UK in one or more of the previous 3 years। सेकंड कंडीशन, इसमें नहीं फंसा तो सेकंड पे जाने का सीक्वेंस याद रखना। सेकंड कंडीशन इज 46 days, you were in the UK for less than 46 days and not been UK resident in any of the previous 3 tax years। Third condition, you were in the UK for less than 91 days and you work overseas full time। आप अगर ऑब्जर्व करो तो ये तीनों केसेस में द ओवरसीज वाला जो कंडीशन है, दीज आर ऑल एंड कंडीशंस। ठीक है। तीनों के तीनों कंडीशंस जो है वो एंड कंडीशन है, विच मींस both parts have to be fulfilled। start with this। अगर 16 डेज ही फुलफिल नहीं, लेस देन 16 डेज फुलफिल नहीं हो रहा है तो सेकंड पार्ट चेक करने का जरूरत ही नहीं है। ठीक है। सो लेट्स क्विकली रिवाइज व्हाट आर द थ्री कंडीशंस फॉर ऑटोमेटिक नॉन रेसिडेंस टेस्ट। person is in the UK for less than 16 days and was a resident in at least one of the previous 3 years। Second condition, he was in the UK for less than 46 days, but he was not a UK resident in any of the 3 years। And third condition, he was in the UK for less than 91 days and he is working full time overseas। इनमें से किसी में भी अगर आप फंस गए, if you get stuck in any of these, then you are out of, then you are a non resident। अगर कहीं पे भी नहीं फंसे तो यू विल गो टू ऑटोमेटिक यूके रेसिडेंस टेस्ट। अब ऑटोमेटिक यूके रेसिडेंस टेस्ट में देर आर अगेन थ्री नंबर्स, 183, ठीक है, दूसरा है 30 एंड तीसरा है 365। अब हाउ डू आई रिमेम्बर 183? पूरे साल में 365 डेज, 365 का हाफ करो, 182.5, round it up. So if you were in the UK for 183 days or more in that year, then you are a resident. Or if you were in the UK for 30 days in the tax year and the individual's only home is in the United Kingdom, then again you will say that you are a resident in the UK. या फिर you were in the UK for 365 days working continuously full time, some of which fall in the tax year. अब ये जो 365 days continuously वाला working condition है, let's see that. Suppose Meet is in the UK from 1st of December 25 to 21st of December 2026. आप यूके का सीए ही बोलते हो ना अपने कोर्स को, तो यू कैन गो देयर। अब ऐसे भी बेवकूफ जनता को समझ में नहीं आता है अनलेस यू से दिस। What is your tax year? 25-26. You want to see whether Meet was resident in the UK for the tax year 25-26. अब 25-26 tax year में he was there in the UK from 1st of December to 5th of April 26, which basically is 126 days. So अगर आप 183 days वाला condition पकड़ोगे तो he will not be considered a resident. But आप overall check करो, overall for how many days was he in the UK? 1st of December to 21st of December 26. ठीक है। अब this is a period of more than 365 days. ये 365 continuous days होना चाहिए working full time, some of which fall in the tax year. So he was here for more than कितने days हो गए? 365 days plus 20, 385 days के लिए he was in the UK. 365 continuous days, some of which fall in the current tax year. So how many days fall in the current tax year? 126 days fall in the current tax year. He will be considered resident in the UK. 365 days continuously working there full time, some of which falls in the current tax year. अब ये वाला कंडीशन मतलब जहां पे आपको ये सिंबल दिखता है ना स्टडी टेक्स्ट में, वो कंडीशन पे ज्यादा ध्यान मत देना when you are so close to the exam. But if for some reason you are not able to satisfy even these tests, then you will have to go to the sufficient ties test. I think this weekend only we did a question that had sufficient ties and ये वाला उसमें चेक हुआ था ना 90 days वाला, if I am not wrong. ऐसा ही कुछ क्वेश्चन किया था आई थिंक दिस वीकेंड। Now, the sufficient ties test has 5 ties that bind you to the United Kingdom. F, family, has close family in the UK that are UK resident, और close family मतलब spouse या फिर civil partner या फिर minor children. ठीक है, they have to be resident in the UK. Just them staying there is not enough. Family tie है या accommodation tie, has a house in the UK which is made use of during the tax year and is available for at least 91 consecutive days during the tax year. So you need a house in the UK which is made use of and for at least 91 days it is available during the tax year. या फिर you are doing substantive work in the UK, you are there for at least 40 days. ठीक है, या फिर डेज इन द यूके वाला कंडीशन है, हैज स्पेंट मोर देन 90 डेज इन द यूके इन ईदर और बोथ ऑफ द प्रीवियस 2 tax years, या फिर यू स्पेंड मोर टाइम इन यूके देन इन एनी अदर कंट्री ड्यूरिंग द टैक्स ईयर। दीज 5 आर योर सफिशियंट टाइज। अब एग्जाम में यू माइट बी गिवन सम ऑफ दीज सफिशियंट टाइज एंड यू हैव टू इवैल्यूएट। उसके साथ साथ ना दिस टेबल विल आल्सो बी गिवन टू यू। सो हाउ टू रीड दिस टेबल? इफ यू वर प्रीवियसली रेसिडेंट इन द यूके, ठीक है, एंड इन द करंट ईयर you were in the UK for say 46 to 90 days, say you were in the UK for 50 days, then if you were previously resident you would be treated as resident in the UK in the current tax year if you fulfill 3 ties or more. But if you were in the UK for say 150 days and you were previously a non-resident, then you would be considered resident in the UK in the current year if you fulfill at least 2 UK ties. If not, then tata bye bye. Then otherwise you will become automatically resident in the country if 183 days or more हो गया तो। ठीक है, this table by the way is given to you in the exam, but the sufficient ties are not mentioned. So let's quickly revise the 5 sufficient ties. Family, you have close family in the UK who is resident in the UK. F, family, wife, sorry, matlab spouse, live-in wala situation and minor children. And they have to be resident in the UK. Second, accommodation. You need a house in the UK which was available for use for at least 91 days during the year, 91 consecutive days in the year. Then work, you were working in the UK for at least 40 days. Then days in the UK. You have spent 90 days or more in the UK in either one or both of the preceding two tax years. या फिर country. You spend more time in the UK than in any other country in the world. आई थिंक इसका एग्जाम्पल में हमने वो वाला देखा था ना वेयर दिस पर्सन इज ही गोज फॉर अ ट्रिप एंड वो अपना फ्लोरिडा में जाता है एंड कहीं कहीं जाता है एंड दैट कंडीशन आई थिंक वी हैड सीन दैट क्वेश्चन टू डिटरमाइन हाउ मेनी डेज डिड यू स्पेंड इन द यूनाइटेड किंगडम. Okay. Now, in order to make lives easier, in order to, somehow ensure that individuals are not overtaxed, because individuals will feel that, okay, we came in the UK in October, and by some stroke of bad luck, we are being considered as a resident in the UK. तो यार income that we earned when we were overseas, वो income को भी तुम UK में tax क्यों लगाते हो? Have you no shame? To prevent this dissatisfaction and unhappiness amongst the people at large, HMRC came up with the idea of split year basis. Split year basis में क्या होता है? In the same year, for a part of the year, you are considered resident, and for remaining part of the year, you are not considered resident. Naturally, for the part in which you are not resident in the UK, in that for that particular duration, whatever profits or whatever income you have earned outside the UK is not taxed in the UK. But जब आप resident in the United Kingdom बन जाते हो, then whatever income you earn after that cutoff date, that gets taxed in the United Kingdom. Now there are two different set of split year basis rules which are applicable for people leaving the UK and for people coming to the UK. You know, I tried to do this for you guys, but ये अभी तक उतना सक्सेसफुल हुआ नहीं. I was trying to work on something like this, like a PPT, बट वो जैसा मुझे चाहिए ना वैसा वो हुआ नहीं है. तो you will have to be content with the flow charts, unfortunately. अगर ये बन जाता विजुअली अट्रैक्टिव तो मैं दे देता आपको, बट वो हो नहीं रहा है उतना.
सर काफी अट्रैक्टिव है।
ठीक ठाक लग रहा है.
Yes, sir.
Suddenly smitten by the PPT bug, बट देन PPT पे मुझे लिखना नहीं आता है, तो दैट्स अ डील ब्रेकर. ठीक है, लेट मी सी. बट यार अभी उतना टाइम भी नहीं बचा है. इफ बाय टुमारो आई एम एबल टू कम अप विद समथिंग आई विल सेंड, अदरवाइज रिलाई ऑन द नोट्स एंड रिलाई ऑन द फ्लो चार्ट्स. हाँ, वो फ्लो चार्ट बहुत एग्जॉस्टिव है, उसमें सब कुछ है. हाँ, देयर इज नथिंग दैट आई हैव मिस्ड आउट इन द फ्लो चार्ट. हाँ, कुछ बहुत ही फाइनर न्यूआंस होगा तो वो नहीं है, दैट आई अंडरस्टैंड. Okay. So the split year basis for persons leaving the UK. How do we apply? Split year basis applies in the current tax year if a person is resident in the previous year, resident in the current year, not resident in the following year, and leaves the UK partway through the current tax year for one of the three reasons. आप सबसे पहले if you have trouble remembering और बहुत लोड आ रहा है तो पहले ये बोल्ड वाला सब हेडिंग याद कर लो. Person leaving the UK for one of the three reasons. The person starts working abroad, or accompanies or later joins a partner abroad to continue to live with that partner, या फिर ceases to have any UK home. If he begins working abroad, it has to be full-time work and does not spend more than a permitted number of days in the UK after departure. This period is proportionately reduced for depending on when he leaves the UK, or his spouse or civil partner goes outside UK to work there and he joins the civil partner or the spouse to live with him in that country, then in that case also the split year basis will apply. या फिर the individual ceases to have any UK home and he goes to another country, purchases a house there and establishes ties with the overseas country. So that is what you mean by ceases to have any UK home. अब after ceasing to have a UK home, spends minimal time in the UK, less than 16 days, and establishes ties with the overseas country by setting up a house there, by taking a home, by buying a home there, or by renting a home there. He shifts his base to another country and spends more than 6 months in the overseas country. Then the split year basis will apply from the date he ceases to have a UK home. When he is leaving the UK to start working abroad, the overseas part starts from the date he starts the overseas work. And where this person accompanies or later joins a partner abroad to continue to live with that partner, it is later of the two dates, the date the partner starts overseas work or the date he joins the partner, whatever comes later, that will be from that date the overseas part will start. मतलब my wife moves abroad एंड मैं घर जमाई हूं तो मैं उसके साथ आई ऑल्सो मूव, ठीक है। शी स्टार्ट्स वर्क ऑन 10th of October, मैं आज ही चला गया, तो ओवरसीज पार्ट विल स्टार्ट फ्रॉम 10th of October। और शी गोज टुडे ऑन 26th of August एंड आई ज्वाइन हर ऑन 15th of October, तो ओवरसीज पार्ट विल स्टार्ट फ्रॉम द 15th of October। बेसिकली दे वांट टू एंश्योर दैट योर यूके पार्ट इज द लॉन्गेस्ट, ठीक है। सो स्प्लिट ईयर बेसिस में फर्स्ट सिचुएशन दैट वी सॉ इज person, let's quickly revise what all is covered in split year basis. Person has to be resident in the previous year, resident in the current year, not resident in the following year, and leaves the UK for one of the three reasons. Reason number one, he starts working full time abroad. Then the date from which he starts full time abroad work, उस डेट से the overseas part starts. या फिर he leaves the United Kingdom to be with his spouse or civil partner who has taken up work abroad. Then the overseas part starts from the later of the day he joins the partner or the day the partner starts his work there. या फिर he ceases to have a UK home. In that case, the date when he ceases to have the UK home is the date when the overseas part starts. And then he has to stay there for a minimum period of 6 months, and all of those conditions will continue. Okay. So that is split year basis for an individual leaving the United Kingdom. Okay. Now, similar split year basis also arise for individuals who are coming to the United Kingdom. उस केस में थोड़ा सा conditions are starting condition थोड़ा सा reverse हो जाता है, and let's see what that is. अच्छा, these Excel notes are the same that we used in our class, but अभी मैंने सब एक शीट में डाला है, तो मैं आपको दोबारा भेजूं फिर से रेगुलर ग्रुप पे, चाहिए आपको?
सर क्या बोला आपने?
What I said is these Excel notes ना, अपना जो मल्टीपल क्लासेस में स्कैटर्ड है, यहाँ पे सारा का सारा ओवरसीज इज इन वन प्लेस। सो
भेज दो सर, भेज दो।
मना तो करेंगे नहीं किसी चीज को, क्यों?
हाँ यस सर, maybe help.
अरे सेम ठीक है, भेज दूंगा, बट सेम चीज है। आपको क्या लगता है सेम शीट आप दो बार पढ़ोगे तो दो बार मार्क्स मिलेगा आपको?
सर अभी आपने इतना एफर्ट लिया है तो भेज ही दो ना।
अच्छा,
Right.
चलो, someone cares about my effort, I'm happy. Okay. How do you apply this to a person arriving in the UK? The split year basis applies in the current tax year if the individual is not resident in the previous year, resident in the current year, and arrives in the UK partway through the current year for one of the four reasons. He acquires a UK home. And if you remember, we did one question jahan pe we proved it ki acquires does not mean purchase. Acquires means rent pe liya to bhi chalega. Acquires a UK home and did not have sufficient ties in the UK to be UK resident prior to acquiring a UK home. ठीक है। सो अभी समीर जैसे गया था उधर इन द यूनाइटेड किंगडम, तब उसके पास घर नहीं था। नाउ ही गोज टू द यूके, नॉट रेसिडेंट इन द प्रीवियस ईयर, करंट ईयर में ही गोज देयर इन द मंथ ऑफ ऑगस्ट और सितंबर एंड acquires a UK home, then that is enough reason to think about the split year basis, but he should not have sufficient ties with the UK before acquiring this house. मतलब उसका कोई spouse वाउस वाला condition fulfill नहीं होना चाहिए, ठीक है। Then from the date he acquires the UK home, the UK part starts, या फिर begins working in the UK. Rachit goes to the UK to work there full time. He stays there for greater than 365 continuous days and did not have sufficient ties in the UK to be UK resident prior to that entry. तो उधर जाने के पहले he doesn't have a wife, spouse, बच्चा, anything who is resident in the UK. इसके पहले he did not have another house in the UK. He did not fulfill any of the other sufficient ties. But अभी जाके he started working there and he has worked there for greater than 365 continuous days. Then from the date he starts work in the UK, उसका ओवरसीज पार्ट खत्म और यूके पार्ट चालू. और सीजेस वर्क अब्रॉड एंड रिटर्न्स टू यूके. मीत वाज वर्किंग इन स्पेन एंड ही वाज ओरिजिनली, सी वहां पे क्या वर्ड लिखा है, रिटर्न्स टू द यूके. व्हेन कैन यू रिटर्न? व्हेन यू वर देयर एट सम पॉइंट ना. तो पहले वो था यूके में, देन ही लेफ्ट द यूनाइटेड किंगडम, स्टार्टेड वर्किंग इन स्पेन, फिर उधर का काम छोड़ के वापस आ गया. ठीक है. In that case, after he returns to the UK following a period when he worked overseas full time and is resident in UK in the following tax year, so the date from which he stops working overseas, that becomes the UK part. या फिर accompanies or later joins a partner in UK to continue to live with that partner. So वहां पे था leaves UK to stay with the partner, यहाँ पे है comes to UK to stay with the partner. That is also eligible grounds for split year basis. The thing about split year basis is ये optional नहीं है. ये अगर आप condition fulfill करोगे तो split year basis will become applicable to you. Now, I am not spending time in on all the questions because we don't have that much time. क्लास में ये सब हम कर चुके हैं. I'll only go through those questions where I feel कि it's critical. अब Bjorn has been, क्या नाम है पता नहीं, has been working part time for his employer in Sweden for many years, but on 1st of July 24 he came to the UK in search of alternative employment. He had no UK ties and has been resident in the UK in the past. In the UK, he temporarily stayed with a friend until he secured a full-time 3-year contract of employment and a house to rent in Nottingham. He signed a 3-year lease agreement, moved into the house on 1st of August 2024 and started work on 22nd of August 2024. Whenever you are doing the split year basis, अगर दो conditions apply हो रहे हैं, ठीक है. If you talk about people arriving in the UK, person acquires a UK home, then date when he acquires the UK home, वहां से UK part will start. Person arrives in the UK, begins working in the UK, the date he starts work in the UK, that from that date the UK part starts. अब ये जो person है, he came to UK, he signed a 3-year lease agreement and moved into the house on 1st of August 24. तो UK part कब से शुरू होगा? 1st of August 24. बट एक और कंडीशन है स्प्लिट ईयर बेसिस का, अराइव्स इन द यूके एंड बिगिंस वर्किंग इन द यूके फुल टाइम. वो कब से फुलफिल हो रहा है? फ्रॉम 22nd of August. सी यहाँ पे ओवरसीज, इफ द यूके पार्ट इज स्टार्टिंग फ्रॉम 1st of August, तो ओवरसीज पार्ट रहेगा टिल 31st of July. If you start the UK part from 22nd of August, then overseas part will be till 21st of August. Whenever you are deciding which one to be chosen, always keep in mind that the overseas part has to be kept the smallest. Overseas part को आपसे सबसे कम रखना है. So which is why the UK part will start from 1st of August in this case. ठीक है. चलो, अब ओवरसीज इनकम. अब ओवरसीज इनकम ट्रेडिंग इनकम भी हो सकता है, रेंटल इनकम भी हो सकता है, एम्प्लॉयमेंट इनकम इज देयर, कुछ भी हो सकता है ओवरसीज इनकम. इन केस ऑफ ओवरसीज इनकम, sadly, if you are both resident and domiciled in the United Kingdom, then global income is taxed in the UK. ठीक है. If you are not resident in the UK, then only UK income is taxed in the UK. Overseas income is not taxed. If you are resident and domicile in UK, UK income is also taxed, overseas income is also taxed. If you are resident in the UK but not domiciled in the United Kingdom, then फिर क्या होगा? If you are resident in the United Kingdom but not domiciled in the United Kingdom, उस केस में क्या होगा? In that case, there is a different thought process that has to be applied. Now, what is that? ठीक है, you are a person who is resident but not domiciled in the UK. If the Here you have to understand the meaning of the word remittance. Remit means to send back. ठीक है, money that you have earned abroad, income that you have earned abroad, you have to send it back to the United Kingdom. Now, if the unremitted amount of overseas income and gains is less than 2000 pounds, then the remittance basis is automatic. Remittance basis matlab only that income will be taxed in the UK which is sent to the UK. जो पैसा आपने यूके में नहीं भेजा, that will not be taxed. But if the unremitted amount of income and gains is more than 2000 pounds, then what is the default basis? The default basis is the arising basis. Arising basis मतलब accrual basis पे आपका income will be subjected to tax in the UK, and PA is available. But you also have an option to select the remittance basis. ठीक है, I'm talking about a situation where you are resident but not domiciled in the United Kingdom. ठीक है, resident but not domiciled in the United Kingdom, and the amount of unremitted overseas income and gains is greater than 2000 pounds. You can go for the remittance basis, but if you go for the remittance basis, then PA is not allowed and there is a possibility of a remittance basis charge. अब ये remittance basis charge किस पे? When is remittance basis charge applicable? If you are not UK domicile, UK resident in the current year, unremitted income and gains is greater than 2000 pounds, and you choose for the remittance basis to apply, then if you were UK resident in 7 out of the 9 last tax years, the additional charge is 30,000. If you were UK resident for 12 out of the 14 last tax years, then additional remittance basis charge is 60,000. ये values आपको पेपर में दिया रहेगा, ठीक है? And double taxation relief is of course available. Let's quickly revise the provision. Okay, you are a person who is a resident in the UK but not domiciled. ठीक है, you make whatever money you make abroad, but the amount of unremitted income and gains is greater than or equal to 2000 pounds. And in that case, the default basis is the arising basis or the accrual basis. ठीक है, if accrual basis is your default basis, तो personal allowance मिलेगा. But if you go for the remittance basis, चलता है, you can go for the remittance basis. But the moment you choose remittance basis, no PA, and there is a possibility that the remittance basis charge will be levied on you. What is the remittance basis charge? If you were resident in the UK in 7 out of the last 9 tax years, so 30,000 ka additional charge. If you were a resident in the UK in 12 out of the 14 last tax years, then in that case, the remittance basis charge is 60,000 pounds per annum. ठीक है, and all the overseas income is always taxed as non-savings income in the highest slice. वो highest slice वाला तो हमने top most slice का बाकी cases में भी देखा है how that works. ठीक है, चलो guys, it's 9:45. Give me 5 minutes. ठीक है, 5 minutes में we'll resume. ठीक है, चलो. We had discussed the remittance basis before going for our break. Again, there are more questions on remittance basis. And acha, let's do this one question where you have to make a decision on whether to choose the remittance basis or not. Diego and Valentina are both domiciled in the USA but have been resident in the UK for the last 10 years. Their income for the tax year 24-25 is as follows. ठीक है, डिएगो का ओवरसीज है 3 लाख, वैलेंटीना का ओवरसीज है 40,000. रेमिटेड टू द यूके, डिएगो रेमिटेड 55,000, वैलेंटीना रेमिटेड 18,000. ठीक है, लेट्स एनालाइज फॉर डिएगो. यू हैव टू जज एंड टेल वेदर द remittance basis should be applied or not. ठीक है, now if remittance basis is not chosen for Diego, ठीक है, मतलब he will be taxed on the arising basis. 3 lakh is the overseas income, उसमें से remitted to UK 55,000, amount not remitted is 245. But because you are choosing the arising basis, पूरा का पूरा 3 lakh पे आपका income tax calculate होगा. You have to understand that this is an additional rate taxpayer. उसके हिसाब से tax is 121203. I am not calculating the tax right now. If you go for the remittance basis, then how much is remitted to UK? 55,000 is remitted to UK. Amount unremitted is 245. So taxable income होगा 55,000, but you will not get any PA here because you have chosen the remittance basis. उस पे आपका टैक्स आएगा 14,460 and remittance basis charge because see, this person has been resident in the UK for 10 years. 7 out of 9 हो गया तो 30,000. 12 out of 14 हो गया तो 60,000. Here, the amount of remittance basis charge is 30,000. ठीक है. Total tax payable is 44,460. Yes, Jeet.
सर ये नॉन सेविंग इनकम में आएगा रेमिटेंस बेसिस, वो तो समझा। पर ये टॉप स्लाइस में आएगा तो 45% पे चार्ज नहीं होगा ये रेमिटेंस बेसिस?
सी बट टॉप स्लाइस में उसको आना भी तो चाहिए ना, वो बंदे को ही शुड बी इन द टॉप स्लाइस ना। 45 में वो है ही नहीं, तो इफ यू आर नॉट इन दैट स्लैब हाउ कैन यू बी टैक्स्ड इन दैट स्लैब एट द टॉप स्लाइस? टॉप स्लाइस मींस योर इनकम का स्लाइस ना,
ओके ओके।
और नॉट इन
So
दैट।
still the basic rate band and the higher rate band will apply, right?
Yeah, so but then see that when does that happen? If you have other sources of income which are not taxed that way, say for example, here you had some local income also, some domestic UK income also, then that income would be taxed first in the basic rate band and then you would come ulta. But यहाँ पे the only income is the overseas income, right?
Okay, okay, I understand. Yes. If there is employment income, then employment will charge
Tax
first and
first.
whatever.
Right.
Okay, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Welcome. Now, for Valentina, she earned 40,000 overseas. Assume that she goes for the arising basis. ठीक है, she earned 40K overseas. She remitted 18 to UK, 22,000 is not remitted. The UK tax will be on 40,000 because you are not choosing the remittance basis. You get your PA. Taxable income is 27,430. Tax is 5,486. If she chooses the remittance basis, unremitted amount is 22,000. Remitted amount is 18,000. No PA because you have chosen the remittance basis. Tax hoga 3,600. But she was also resident in the UK in for 10 years. 7 out of 9 हो गया तो आपको लगाना है रेमिटेंस बेसिस चार्ज एट द रेट ऑफ 30,000। ठीक है, टोटल अमाउंट पेएबल इज 33,600। 3600 प्लस द रेमिटेंस बेसिस चार्ज। नाउ इन केस ऑफ यस सुमित।
सर अगर रेमिटेंस बेसिस ऑटोमेटिक है तो अपन को पीए मिलता है ना?
रेमिटेंस बेसिस हाँ, अगर इफ द अमाउंट ऑफ अनरेमिटेड इनकम एंड गेन्स इज लेस देन 2,000
हाँ हाँ, तो पीए
हाँ
मिलेगा।
तो पीए मिलेगा, बट यहाँ पे बिकॉज द अमाउंट इज मोर यहाँ पे नहीं मिलेगा।
ओके।
ठीक है, ओके। नाउ डबल टैक्सेशन रिलीफ इन केस ऑफ एन इंडिविजुअल थोड़ा सा कॉम्प्लेक्स है, प्लीज पे अटेंशन हाउ टू कैलकुलेट दैट। टैक्स सफर्ड ओवरसीज वाला कैलकुलेशन इज सिंपल, बट यूके टैक्स ऑन ओवरसीज इनकम, हाउ डू वी कैलकुलेट दैट? हु कैन टेल मी? यूके टैक्स ऑन ओवरसीज इनकम इन केस ऑफ एन इंडिविजुअल, संडे को ही किया है हमने। हु कैन टेल मी? यस मिस्टर रॉय।
Sir, first we need to calculate UK tax without the overseas income, and then we have to calculate tax on that, and then we have to include separately. We have also have to include the overseas, and the difference will be the
Correct.
yeah.
And you know the reason why this happens, right? In case of companies, na, there is no concept of slab. In case of companies, it's 25%, 19% जो भी होगा. When your income changes, the slab rate, the rate doesn't change. I mean, you don't have some part of the income getting taxed at 19% and some part of the income getting taxed at 25%. वो situation नहीं है, but individuals में 20, 40, 45 वाला scene है. So what you should do is you should first of all calculate UK tax on your total income excluding the overseas income. उस पे tax निकालो. Then calculate UK tax on total income including the overseas income. वो tax calculate करो. The difference between the two is UK tax on overseas income. So your amount of DTR is lower of tax suffered overseas and UK tax on overseas income. But UK tax on overseas income calculate करने का approach I have told you slightly different. ठीक है, okay. Now, in case of we understood how the remittance basis works, we understood how the double taxation relief works. Just remember one thing in this case, that If there is more than one source of overseas income, you need separate DTR calculation for each source of overseas income and take out the source with the highest rate of overseas tax first. Yes, Sean.
Sir, just one question. So, while we are calculating tax including the overseas income, so that will come after the dividend income, right? So we'll tax non-savings,
Total,
savings,
total.
and dividend, and then in the end, overseas.
Yeah, you because
Okay,
the overseas income is taxed as the top slice.
okay, sir, got it.
ठीक है. For example, this situation. Hussain is resident and domiciled in the UK. In the tax year 24-25, his only taxable income is an overseas dividend of 47,500 and UK property income of 20,000. The dividend is received after deduction of 5%. ठीक है. UK property income है 20,000 and overseas dividend है 50,000. Total है 70,000. PA is 12,570. Now, if you want to calculate his UK income tax liability, आपको पहले कैलकुलेट करना पड़ेगा टोटल टैक्स इन द यूके इंक्लूडिंग द ओवरसीज इनकम दैट इज योर टोटल लाइबिलिटी. देन व्हेन यू हैव टू कैलकुलेट द डीटीआर विल बी लोअर ऑफ tax suffered overseas 50,000 into 5%, which is 2500. Yeah, UK tax on overseas income, which is we know how to calculate that. पहले calculate करो total tax on income including overseas income, then total tax on income excluding overseas income. ये दो tax figures का जो difference है, that is UK tax on the overseas source of income. ठीक है. When you have multiple sources, then आपको हर एक source के लिए you will have to calculate the amount of double taxation relief separately. ठीक है. अब in case of overseas corporate gains, sorry, in case of overseas capital gains tax, again वो domiciled and non-domicile वाला situation आएगा. Now we didn't go through the domicile part, so let's quickly revise what is domicile. There are four types of domicile. Who can tell me?
एक ओरिजिन से होता है, एक चॉइस होती है, एक फैमिली होता है और बाय बॉर्न.
डिपेंडेंसी.
And
Depend.
deemed.
So
लास्ट वन इज डीम्ड.
लास्ट वन इज डीम्ड डोमिसाइल. उसमें एक लॉन्ग रेसिडेंस वाला है 15 आउट ऑफ 20 टैक्स ईयर्स, है ना. देन देर इज वन मोर विच इज दैट वन.
Formerly domiciled resident born in UK, domiciled of origin, and UK resident in the year.
बड़ा होशियार है यार रचित, उसको याद है. कैन यू रिपीट इट फॉर एवरीवन.
So, formerly domiciled resident, the person must be domiciled by origin, matlab born in the UK, and UK resident in that year.
Correct. So formerly domiciled residents या 12 out 15 out of 20 tax years, दोनों situations में you will be considered as deemed domiciled in the UK. But that is not the focus of our discussion. The focus is a person is resident in the UK. Answer is, if the answer is no, then all gains are exempt from capital gains tax. There are three exceptions, वो देखते हैं बाद में. But if a person is resident in the UK, ask the question, is he also domiciled in the UK or is he deemed domiciled? इनमें से कुछ होगा. If the person is UK domiciled, का answer is yes. Then taxable on worldwide gains and overseas losses are allowable, which means let the person have a capital gain anywhere in the world. ये कटोरा लेके खड़े हो जाएंगे कि yes, levy tax on us, we are going to levy tax on you wherever that property might be situated, even if it is situated in some part of Australia. You are taxable on worldwide gains and DTR will be available. If you are resident in the UK but you are not domiciled in the UK, then UK gains are taxable. Overseas gains are taxable but depends upon the amount of unremitted overseas income and gains. If the amount of unremitted overseas income and gains is less than £2,000, then remittance basis is automatic and AEA is available. सब नॉर्मल कैलकुलेशन चलता है. बट इफ द अमाउंट ऑफ अनलिमिटेड ओवरसीज इनकम एंड गेन्स इज मोर देन 2,000, ठीक है, then in that case arising basis is automatic and you will get AEA and overseas losses are also allowed. But if you choose to go for the remittance basis, then no AEA and possible remittance basis charge. Also, you cannot have a separate election for income tax purpose and a separate election for CGT purpose. Whatever applies to income tax will apply to CGT also. आपको DTR तो मिलेगा, no doubt DTR will be available to you, but there is one more choice that you get, which is basically if remittance basis applies, are overseas losses available? It depends upon what kind of election you have made. ठीक है, एक बार वो देख लो. The remittance basis will still be automatically available for deemed domiciled individuals if their unremitted overseas income and gains are under 2000. But if the amount of unremitted income and gains is more than 2000, the individual will need to consider the remittance basis election each year separately, as a large overseas gain in a year may make the remittance basis claim worthwhile in that year but not in the other years. Now, there is an election that you can make about capital losses suffered overseas. The capital loss election is a one-off election that had to be made the first time the individual elected for the remittance basis to apply, whether or not the taxpayer had any capital losses at that time. If the election is not made, then foreign capital losses may not be used while the individual is still not UK domiciled. As the capital loss election is binding and the remittance basis election will probably have been claimed in the past by the taxpayer, in the exam question, you may need to find out whether or not the capital election was made at that time. Where proceeds from the sale of an overseas capital asset are remitted to the UK, that amount of capital gain is deemed to be remitted first. अब यहाँ पे one critical point that you have to remember is there is a loss election. Okay, what is the loss election? The election to exempt overseas. The capital loss election is a one-off election. इससे क्या होता है? You can make an election to adjust the overseas losses, capital losses against your UK corporate gains. Now, this election, whether you want to adjust it against UK capital gains, this election has to be made in the first year in which you have overseas income. अगर उस साल में you do not make the election to adjust overseas losses against UK capital gains, then if you don't make the election, then that decision is binding on you. You cannot adjust overseas losses ever against your UK capital gains. So the first year in which you have overseas income or gains, in that year itself, you should make an election to adjust overseas capital losses against UK capital gains. अगर आपने first year में ये election नहीं किया, तो तो you will never be allowed to make that election ever again. So you should specifically make it a point to make that election in the first year. Now, इस पे based एक question है ना exam kit में, if I remember it right. अब हमने किया भी है. Let's go through that question once again, but a question exactly like this we have done in the past. उसमें 3 or 4 marks का ही सब part था where the election had to be made. ठीक है. Now, one thing that we observed was if you are an individual who is not resident in the UK, then all gains are exempt from UK corporate tax. Sorry, are exempt from UK taxes. So here you might have a situation. There are 3 exceptions to this rule. And before understanding those exemptions, let's quickly understand how is DTR calculated. DTR is again overseas capital gains tax suffered and UK capital gains tax on the disposal of that particular overseas asset. Now, you could have a situation, there are 3 exceptions, and you might be asked one of them, the temporary residence abroad wala jo condition hai, that is very frequently tested in the paper. The other day, we also saw a situation where there was a PRR in respect of there was an individual who was not resident in the UK. He was disposing of a UK property. So we wanted to calculate whether he will get PRR in respect of that particular property. So that is also a special situation that you need to be aware of. And what exactly is that special situation? We'll see. But then there is the temporary residence abroad wala provision. Uske liye you have to refer to this flowchart. An individual returns to the UK after staying abroad. ठीक है, there was a period of time briefly when he was not in the United Kingdom. आप check करो, re-entry into the UK was within 5 years from the date of departure. ठीक है, he left UK and he came back to UK within 5 years from the date of departure. If the answer to that is yes, Then check whether he was resident in 4 or more of the 7 tax years immediately preceding the tax year of departure. ठीक है. So there is a person who is not resident in the UK, but he comes back to UK within 5 years from the date of his leaving the UK. Then you should check whether he was resident in 4 or more of the 7 tax years immediately preceding the year of departure. If the answer to that is yes, then disposal of assets in UK while you were abroad will be taxable. ठीक है. When you return to UK, the amount will be taxable on the date when you come back to the United Kingdom. ठीक है. But if you were not a resident in the UK for 4 or more of the immediately preceding 7 tax years, then disposal of assets in UK while you were abroad is not taxable in the United Kingdom. And if the answer to this question is no, which question re-entry into the UK within 5 years from the date of departure, then in that case, no tax on disposal of assets in the UK while you were abroad. ठीक है. And when does the trigger for taxation happen? When the person comes back to the United Kingdom within 5 years. One critical condition for levying this tax is that you should have been owning the asset on the date when you left the UK. If you acquired an asset while you were abroad and then you disposed of that asset, then that does not get covered under the temporary residence abroad rules. Okay, I will repeat the temporary residence abroad rule for you. There is an individual, he leaves the UK and then he returns to UK within 5 years from the date of his exit. Usually, what is the rule that if you are not a resident in the UK, then all gains are exempt. But if you are not a resident in the UK for 2 years and then you again came back to the United Kingdom, आपको क्या check करना है that in the case of this person, was he resident in the UK in 4 out of the 7 tax years immediately preceding the year of departure? If the answer to that is yes, then disposals that happened while you were abroad will be taxed on the date when you return to the United Kingdom. But if 4 out of 7 wala condition is not fulfilled, then in that case, this particular tax doesn't apply. ठीक है. So that is the temporary residence abroad wala condition. Another critical point that you need to keep in mind in this situation is that the person should have owned the asset on the date he left the United Kingdom. If he doesn't own the asset on the date he left the United Kingdom, then that amount is not taxable. ठीक है. वो capital gain will not be taxed. Second situation is non-UK residents and UK property disposals. Non-UK residents are subject to CGT on disposal of UK residential property after 5th of April 19 and disposal of UK non-residential property after 5th of April 19. पहले यूके रेसिडेंशियल प्रॉपर्टी का देख लेते हैं. डिस्पोजल ऑफ अ यूके रेसिडेंशियल प्रॉपर्टी बाय अ नॉन यूके रेसिडेंट इंडिविजुअल is a chargeable disposal and a liability to CGT will arise, but only on gains accruing after 5th of April 15 to the extent that they are not covered by reliefs, PRR, rollover, gift holdover and AEA. अब यहाँ पे ना there are some conditions with respect to PRR that we will study. Quickly देख लेते हैं. See, PRR for non-resident individuals. Okay. Non-resident individual disposes of a UK residential property. उस पे उसको PRR मिलेगा. But PRR with respect to a particular period, PRR will be available only if he was resident in the UK in that tax year and he stayed in the property for a total of at least 90 nights in the tax year. If he does not stay in that property for at least 90 nights in the tax year or he is not resident in the UK, then that particular period will not qualify for PRR. I think last Saturday or Friday on 22nd or 23rd, we did one question which primarily relates to this. Ab, if the UK residential property is purchased after 5th of April, the gain or loss before considering reliefs is calculated in the normal way. And you will only have these disposals in the paper. If you're talking about non-residential properties, then you have the automatic rebasing rule. ठीक है. Rebasing the cost to market value at 5th of April 19 or electing for the whole gain or loss to be transferred. इस पे again there is a question that we have done here. Jim is domiciled in the UK and was UK resident until Jan 18 when he emigrated to Portugal. He purchased an office in the UK as an investment on 4th of October 2017 for 4,20,000. He has rented it out to tenants for the entire period of ownership. On 6th of June 2029, he plans to sell the office and hopes to receive sale proceeds of 7,80,000. The market value of the office on 5th of April 19 was 545. अब यहाँ पे see what are the disposal proceeds? 7,80,000. ठीक है, disposal proceeds are 7,80,000. From that, if you use the automatic rebasing method, instead of considering the original cost of acquisition, which is 4,20,000, you can consider the market value on 5th of April 19, subtract that amount and get your capital gains. If you do not make the automatic rebasing wala election and you choose for the whole gain to be taxed, so 780 minus karna padega 420 and the capital gains tax will be levied on 3,60,000. ठीक है, are you with me, all of you?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
And property outside the UK. UK resident individuals with a property outside the UK. With effect from 6th of April 2015, UK resident individuals with resident property outside the UK will qualify for PRR on that property in a tax year if they were resident in the overseas country for the tax year or stayed in that property for a total of at least 90 nights in the tax year. अब in the previous situation, what we saw, if you wanted to claim, if you were a non-UK resident who wanted to claim PRR on a property that was in the UK, तो उस केस में क्या, what were you supposed to do? In that case, you would have to prove that either you were resident in the UK or you had to specifically be in the UK property for at least 90 nights. तो यहाँ पे if because you are located in an over the property is located overseas, तो सारे conditions आपके reverse हो जाएंगे. You have to be resident in that country or you should have stayed in that property for at least 90 nights. ठीक है, अब ये तो हो गया आपका capital gains वाला part. Now the same overseas aspect is there for inheritance tax. Inheritance tax may be there is an overseas element. Let's see what that is. In case of inheritance tax, the concept of domiciled and deemed domicile, thoda sa it has been extended only for IHT purposes. UK domiciled individuals leaving the UK. An individual who has been domiciled in the UK moves abroad and makes a permanent home in another country is deemed to remain UK domiciled for IHT for a further 3 years after ceasing to be UK domiciled. ठीक है, so it's like पीछा ही नहीं छोड़ रहा है आपका. You have left the UK, you have moved your domicile, you have made a permanent home in another country. Still for 3 years after leaving, you will be deemed to be domiciled in the UK. Then you have your long-term residents and your formerly domiciled resident wala condition, which is pretty much the same that you had for income tax and CGT purposes. Individuals are assessed to IHT as follows: UK domiciled or deemed domiciled, ट्रांसफर ऑफ वर्ल्ड वाइड असेट पे आईएचटी है. नॉन यूके डोमिसाइल्ड होगा तो ट्रांसफर ऑफ यूके असेट्स पे आईएचटी है. हाउ डू यू नो वेदर अ पर्टिकुलर असेट इज लोकेटेड इन द यूके और नॉट? देयर इज अ सेट ऑफ रूल्स दैट हैज बीन गिवन. यू विल हैव टू गो थ्रू दीज रूल्स. लैंड एंड बिल्डिंग होगा तो फिजिकल लोकेशन ऑफ द लैंड और बिल्डिंग. शैटल्स होगा तो लोकेशन ऑफ द शैटल एट द टाइम ऑफ ट्रांसफर. Then debts due to the individual where the debtor resides at the time of transfer. So on and so forth, you will have to determine whether the person is in the UK or not, is domiciled in the, if whether that property is located in the UK or that item is located in the UK for you to levy inheritance tax. There is one special provision in inheritance tax when it comes to this overseas wala situation. ठीक है, if you remember the exempt legacies between spouses, there is no upper limit for exempt legacy. So if a person gives anything to his spouse, there is no inheritance tax on that. But there is one exception to this. ठीक है, what is that exception? Let's understand. A non-UK domiciled individual with a UK domiciled spouse or civil partner can elect to be treated as domiciled in the UK for IHT purposes. ठीक है. If a transfer is done by a UK domiciled spouse, UK domiciled individual to his or her spouse or civil partner who is not domiciled in the UK, then exempt legacy in inter-spouse transfer is restricted to 3,25,000. But the non-UK domiciled spouse can elect to be treated as UK domicile for IHT purposes. In that case, there is no upper limit on the exempt legacy. ठीक है. There is no upper limit on the exempt legacy. अगर a spouse who is not domiciled in the UK elects to be treated as UK domicile, जो domicile नहीं है, he is making an election to be treated as UK domicile so that there is no upper limit on exempt legacy. This election is irrevocable while the electing spouse or civil partner is UK resident, but lapses if that spouse or civil partner becomes non-UK resident for 4 full consecutive tax years. The election can be made within 2 years of the date of death of either the UK domiciled spouse or civil partner or the non-UK domiciled spouse or civil partner by the personal representatives, and this election applies only for inheritance tax. इसका सबसे बड़ा benefit क्या है? When you make this election by a non-UK domiciled person to be treated as UK domiciled for IHT purpose, वो जो upper cap है ना on exempt legacies, that is not there anymore. पूरा 325 का benefit you will get. Now, overseas assets are valued at their open market value on the same basis as assets situated in the UK. However, note that where the value is provided in foreign currency, it is converted into sterling at the exchange rate in force at the date of death, which gives the lowest sterling valuation. ठीक है. Keep the lowest valuation and 5% will be maximum up to 5% will be allowed to be deducted from the मार्केट वैल्यू ऑफ प्रॉपर्टी. इस पे भी आपको डबल टैक्सेशन रिलीफ मिलेगा. डबल टैक्सेशन रिलीफ इन केस ऑफ इनहेरिटेंस टैक्स थोड़ा सा अलग है. DTR is a tax credit against IHT liability of an estate on the death of an individual calculated after QSR. ठीक है. How is it calculated? Lower of overseas tax suffered which will be given in the paper and UK IHT on overseas asset. कैसे निकालना है UK IHT on overseas asset? IHT on the estate after QSR upon gross chargeable estate value into value of asset in the estate. ऐसे करके UK IHT payable on overseas asset is calculated at the average estate rate. And how is average estate rate calculated? IHT on the estate after QSR upon gross chargeable estate value into value of asset in the estate. The this is how double taxation relief is given in case of inheritance tax. ये वाला फॉर्मूला याद करके जाना बिकॉज एक तो स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड है. देर इज नथिंग आउट ऑफ द वर्ल्ड और मतलब लर्न करके जाओ, बाकी के जैसा नहीं है. तो यू विल हैव टू बी अ लिटिल केयरफुल इन दैट वन. ठीक है. तो केयरफुल रहना है तो हो जाना, थोड़ा सा लर्न करके चले जाओ. बाकी का तो सारा CGT और कॉर्पोरेट टैक्स का DTR इज प्रोबेबली द इजीएस्ट. Why do I say that? Because the calculation is very simple. How is the calculation? Tax suffered overseas and UK tax on overseas income or UK tax on overseas gain. Individuals के income tax में थोड़ा सा extensive calculation है और IHT के केस में DTR में you have to use the average estate rate जिसका formula आपको दिया है. Now, one last aspect of overseas taxation is for VAT purposes. See, if you are a VAT registered dealer, you are exporting goods outside UK, the export is zero rated supply. ठीक है. If you are importing goods in the UK, then you apply the postponed accounting scheme, which we also understood as the reverse charge mechanism. How does the reverse charge mechanism work here? See, usually the liability or the responsibility for payment of inheritance tax belongs to the person who is the provider of service. ठीक है. प्रोवाइडर ऑफ सर्विस या सेलर ऑफ गुड्स पे रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी है, बट इन दिस केस द रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी हैज बीन शिफ्टेड टू द बायर. सो इफ आई एम इन यूके, Rachit is in Germany and I'm importing goods from him. So when I import the goods, I am the purchaser. Still, what I have to do is, if the value of that is 1 lakh rupees into 20%, I have to deposit tax with HMRC and later I can claim that as an input tax credit. That is how the overseas VAT on goods works. When you are talking about overseas VAT on services, उसका भी provision एकदम specific है. What is that provision? If the supply of service is to a B2B customer, then place of supply is where the customer is established. If the supply of service is to a non-business customer, retail customer को है, then the place of supply is where the supplier is established. Now, if a UK business provides services to an overseas B2B customer, place of supply is overseas and it is outside the scope of UK VAT. If a UK business supplies services to an overseas retail customer, place of supply is the UK and output VAT is charged at the standard UK rate. If you are importing services, if you are receiving services from an overseas B2B customer, then the reverse charge procedure applies here also, which is basically the postponed accounting scheme. ठीक है. Time of supply has been removed. ये नहीं है अभी. Don't worry. ठीक है. Not so important for your exam. इसको तो चलो मत करो बाबा, इग्नोर. देख लो, मुझे टेंशन आता है. So when you have continuous supplies and when you have single supplies, if there is a single supply, taxation point will be earlier of when the service is completed or when it is paid for. And in case of continuous supplies, the tax point will be the end of each billing or payment period. ठीक है. So if monthly billing हो रहा है तो monthly आपका liability will arise. So that is the long and short of all overseas in ATX paper. So हमने क्या क्या देखा? इंडिविजुअल इनकम टैक्स का ओवरसीज एस्पेक्ट, सीजीटी का ओवरसीज, आईएचटी का ओवरसीज, कॉर्पोरेट टैक्स का ओवरसीज एंड वैट का ओवरसीज. ठीक है. कूल. हाँ.